Director. I have two items on your agenda for today. The first is a bid that we need approval and place on the next City Council meeting, if you all agree to, and that is for membrane replacement. Probably 6 months ago, came in front of you with a proposal to do some changes at the city's reverse osmosis plant. One of the first step was to replace our membranes. Our membranes are now over 10 years old, creeping right up this month on 11 years of age. And as membranes are used, they fail. They start to plug up, and as they plug up, you experience higher electrical costs to push water through the membrane themselves. We clean them once a year, and it rejuvenates it a little bit, but you still don't get all of the fine particles out of the membranes. So they're at the point now where they need to be replaced. We hired Reese Engineering, who came in and evaluated what manufacturers were available. Our RO system is 20 years old. Back 20 years ago, they had 8.5-inch elements, and today they're more or less standardized on an 8-inch element. So there were 3 manufacturers that would produce an 8.5-inch element, 2 of which would go through the process of getting proper approval for DEP purposes. The third was a company out of China that did not want to invest the money to get the approval through DEP. So the 2 manufacturers were then solicited by our purchasing department to give proposals as a bid for the replacement elements. The first was Nito Hydronautics, who was our original membrane that was put in place when we built the RO plant back in 1992. The second company was Tricept, who was the replacement elements that we put in roughly 10 years ago in 2003. And so both of those companies bid on it. The bids were very, very close, within, I think, $1,000 or $2,000 of each other at $240-something thousand. But the second part of the evaluation was for Reese Engineering to look at the operating pressures of what these membranes would operate at, and to do an evaluation over a 5-year period to see what the energy savings may be. So with that, they prepared a report, and the selection was for Tricept, who is the company that we have the membranes with now, as our best choice at this time for overall savings with the purchase. So that is the recommendation. I agree with the recommendation. The water quality between the 2 membrane manufacturers is relatively the same. So what we're looking for is the overall best price over a 5-year period. So although Hydronautics was the low bid, we are recommending to go with the next bidder, which was Tricept. Any questions?
Rob,
yes, sir.
Rob. Would there be any kind of an advantage in converting over to the 8-inch? Might be cheaper or anything?
I looked at it. The problem was you're talking about $1 million investment right now versus a $250,000 investment. And I think the next time the membranes are ready for replacement, there may not be anybody that'll manufacture the 8.5 and will be forced to do the 8-inch membrane at that point. But at this point, there wasn't enough energy. There are some additional energy savings with the 8-inch membrane because there's more manufacturers out there that can produce different membranes. However, that $750,000 investment at this point, you couldn't make it up over the life of the membranes at this point. So we decided up front through the process to. But I did raise that question, and I agree. It needed to be raised and needed to be looked at, and we did. And financially, it didn't make sense at this time.
Rob, how many membranes are there in the operation?
Skids. We have 1 skid online right now, and then there's 2 slots. And the next proposal that we're looking at would be to fill those 2 slots with 2 additional skids at this point. But the membranes, there's roughly 6 membranes per tube, and I'd have to do the math of how many we have in there. But there's
just a general question. I mean, like in do they come in and replace them one at
Yeah,
a time?
what
They
they'll
don't
do
shut
is
everything down.
They'll shut everything down over about a week period, and they'll pull all the membranes out. They'll then sanitize everything that's inside of it, and then they'll start putting the membranes back in, pressure test everything, chlorinate everything, and bring everything back online. So with anything, when you're disassembling something that's been online for 10 years, they felt where we were looking at about a 5-day shutdown, they felt that 2 weeks was a better period to make sure that we can pressure test everything to make sure before we don't want to put everything back together, put it online, and then it leaks. So they wanted to go through and have additional spare parts in case they needed to replace little items here and there, fittings, stuff like that, seals. So we're working with them we will work with them on getting all that information.
As I said, I gave the Pollution Magazine to Jim, and it's got an article about reverse osmosis and doing some electrical work beforehand to keep from plugging the reverse osmosis filters as quickly. So you might read that.
I will, and one of the things that will be part of the second part of when we go to do the plant upgrades, there's some additional piping. Since this system came on 20 years ago, they found that if they what they call it flux, if they equalize the flux across all the membranes and the stages, it'll reduce fouling in the system. So we're going to be doing some additional piping when we do the plant upgrade. Once we bring 2 new skids on, we'll take this unit offline again and do some additional piping to change how it produces water.
I'm looking at the reduction in total dissolved solids and various components between tricep and hydronautics. It seems like the tricep starts off very good but deteriorates rather quickly, whereas hydronautics is not quite as good in total dissolved solids but stays pretty much constant over the 5 years. Is that a relevant factor in your decision making? I mean, does that imply more frequent flushes or more frequent maintenance?
No, like I said, we've had the tricep membranes in place for 10 years now, and they're the same membranes that we're going back with. So we haven't experienced anything that would be more maintenance. And I think in both cases of both hydronautics, when we used them the first time, they really didn't even clean the membranes for about the first 5 years. And then as they started to foul, they started cleaning them yearly after those periods of time. So I don't see it as a issue. And as far as the water quality, believe it or not, when we do the RO plant expansion, we're looking for a looser wound membrane that will allow a little more hardness to come, so that we don't have as aggressive water coming through, because we'll be also changing the amount of water. Right now we have a roughly about a 60-40 split, so 40% of the water that you get through the city's system is reverse osmosis, 60% is from our lime plant. We'll be switching the other way to go to a 40% from the lime plant, 60% from reverse osmosis. So what we were trying to do at that point was look at looser wound membranes, let a little bit more solids pass through, which will allow us to operate at lower pressures and save on electrical costs, because the water quality isn't an issue once we get more reverse osmosis. Right now, water quality is important to us. It was really important to us before we had our reuse system in place, because you were using another 3 million gallons of water a day. Since that period of time, we've reduced quite a bit of our water demands. So.
Rob, just to point, the increases of the TDS, chloride, and et cetera, they're slight compared to the MCL levels that they're well below the MCL levels, so they're just minor as far as the increase is concerned,
Yes.
and would be considered minimal when you're talking water quality.
Yes.
I realize I don't have any idea of what the acceptable levels are, so that might be a useful.
And I think your question was more geared towards, fouling faster with additional costs and cleaning, and
Correct.
That's why my answer was just based on what our experience with both manufacturers over the years. There really wasn't any different. We weren't cleaning one membrane more than the other.
Thank you.
The quoted price it says here, including the bond cost, I'm assuming that's a bond that the company will provide with, or are we financing this?
No, that's a performance bond.
Well, that's
Right,
fine.
yeah.
Make sure.
Yeah, originally when we put it out, the language didn't spell out specifically the performance bond, so we questioned both companies if their price included performance, and one said yes, the other one said no. That we assumed that wasn't part of it, so that's why they submitted in an additional cost for the bond, and I think originally Tricep was lower, and then when they put in the bond costs, they were a little bit higher. But that's why we're just making the statement that it includes all the bond, all the other costs associated with it. But no, we're paying for cash with what we have. So.
Thank you. Any other questions? Any public comment?
I make a motion that we accept the award or recommend the award to the city council.
Second.
All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Motion carries. Good string of unanimous motions today, so. And the last item.
Okay, the last item is for a work authorization for Reese Engineering to start the design on the reverse osmosis plant expansion. It is budgeted in our 5-year plan. Actually, it is budgeted for next year to start the project if they can get the design and permitting and a contractor on board. Like I mentioned earlier, the work includes 2 new skids. It also includes some additional electrical upgrades for some additional pumps. It also includes a complete rework of our operating control system, which is the SCADA system, it's a SCADA system that operates the reverse osmosis skid, or what we call a train. Since we are getting to a point where we're going to be putting 2 new skids in place, we will be upgrading to today's technology. Years ago, in fact, the existing system that we have, you have a bundle of wires this big all coming back to a massive control system sitting in a control room with each wire terminated on both ends that allows for, if the terminal gets loose, then you have a problem with communications and making sure that none of those wires fail over time. The new technologies, what they do is they put more or less a PLC or programmable logic controller at the site of the skid, real close to it. All the wiring is right there attached to the skid, and then it's one big cable that's a communication cable that'll come back into our communication room that plugs in. So less chance of anything going wrong. And then from a repair troubleshooting standpoint, it's just a terminal end check real quick versus, trying to figure out 500 different wires that are there and which one's wrong. So the idea with how we'll do the plant upgrade is we will construct the new and then take the old offline and redo all of the wiring and everything with the old one once the new one is online. So the design, we went through a process of looking at, I prefer personally lump sum design projects versus hourly, because especially during the times of recession that we were in, there's a lot of people, need billable hours, so there's a chance of continue to change order. But in this scope, it's kind of a combination of the two. What we could definitely put our finger on as far as design and then having an engineer of record during the construction process, we were able to put a number to. However, we have a budgetary number of $100,000 in there for someone that would be the on-site inspector or engineer that they would have available to the job. And discussing it with Reese Engineering, neither one of us were comfortable with putting a number out there. However, we were comfortable with putting a budget that once we hire the contractor, whoever it is, will then be able to change it to more of a lump sum type contract, because you have many contractors that are out there. Some you don't have to oversee as much as others. So, to make sure that your product is a good product at the end of the day, we really won't know what that number can be until we go through the whole construction bidding process and look at selecting the contractor. So, and I didn't want to tie it up to where, we have to update this engineering scope of services at the same time we're going through a process. And I also wanted everybody to realize there is another $100,000 of cost of engineering services that may be up to $100,000 cost of engineering services that would be out there for the overall project. So that's kind of the layout of how the scope is. If you have any questions, I'll be glad to answer them.
These will be 8-inch?
These will be 8-inch, yes. And they may not be, and they may be a total different manufacturer at this point. What we will be looking at is the best product for money savings as far as, what we can get for electrical savings.
Rob, what is your guess on the timeline of the design phase?
You're probably looking at about a 6-month design to get final through it, and then you could have 90 days of permit review and everything else. So I would be, and then bidding is probably a 2-month at a minimum phase. So that's why I'm kind of saying if we do anything, we'll be starting this time next year on construction at the earliest.
Will the actual units be fabricated on site, or are they manufactured somewhere and brought in? Because you were talking about skids, so I'm assuming that they come in pre-assembled and you're just kind of connecting up the piping and electrical supplies?
Usually the vessel, the framing will come in, and the actual vessels will all be manufactured at one point and then partially disassembled. It'll be factory tested, that kind of stuff, and then partially disassembled and however they can ship. Mm-hmm. I know your discussion of a skid, we call it a skid, but it's not 100% where you come in and slap it and you hook two ends up, and there's quite a bit. And then the membranes won't be loaded at the factory. They'll be shipped separate, loaded here. So in general purposes, it's probably 60%, something like that, and then 40% on site. But then all the electrical stuff and everything else, it's all part of it is probably the most time consuming that'll be done on site here.
So who will have overall responsibility for the quality? Will it be the manufacturer of the components, or the manufacturer of the membranes, or the engineering company? Who do we go to if it doesn't perform?
The general contractor. Whoever we hire as a general contractor will be the ultimate end responsibility. Now, they'll have contracts with the membrane manufacturers and the whoever it is for performance and for the vessel manufacturer and everything and all of that. So the But at the end of the day, whoever the general contractor will be the one that's make sure that everything works properly, and they will be the one holding the performance bond for the project.
Which means that they'll be putting performance bonds on each of the subcomponents.
Performance requirements on the, yeah. However they're going to do, whatever they're going to do with requirements for each one of their subs.
So we'll have only one contract ourselves with the general contractor?
We'll have a contract
We'll
with
have
the
the
general
same-
contractor, and then we'll have this contract with the engineering company. The engineering company will be making sure that it's being built according to the plans and meets all the requirements and the specifications of our document. But at the end of the day, for the performance of what's being spelled out, the general contractor will be the responsible party to make sure it works. He'll then have contracts with his subcontractors, however that would work, but that's, on the private entity side of things.
Would a phase in this process to qualify vendors eliminate some of the uncertainties up front?
We can, if
Where,
that's a suggestion.
where you say, first, we want to find out whether you're qualified without regard to price, and get a list of people we think totally can perform, and then from there, select the right price.
I don't have any problem with that. If that's a
Well, I'm
suggestion
asking you
of
whether
this
that's a good-
commission, I would be glad to entertain that. It's a very good way to go through. You pre-qualify contractors is what you do.
Yeah.
And we could write a small scope showing, more or less what you're doing is having them submit something that shows all the jobs that they've worked on in the last 5 years with references, and then we contact those reference points, and then we say, okay, you're allowed to bid, and then we'd exclude anybody from bidding outside that.
I'm not necessarily saying, I want you to do that, but if it's up to you more to consider and decide whether that would help or not, especially in the long term.
It would save a lot of
schedule like this.
headaches.
Sometimes it takes a
So-
lot of that out of it.
Yeah, it saves a lot of headaches when you do that, because in the bidding world, you never know who you get, and sometimes, I'll give you an example. We had, the last time we painted all of our ground storage tanks, we got bids from $70,000 to $400,000. And there was 2 bids, one at 70, one at 78, and the next one was at 130. And when we we called the paint manufacturer and asked them what the takeoff on the paint was. The paint was $75,000 alone. So I contacted the 2 lowest bidders and I said, are you planning on painting these tanks for nothing? Because do you realize that the paint cost is $75,000? And they said, could I please withdraw my bid? And I said, yes, you may. So they both did, and we went with the 3rd bidder at that point. So you have a lot of people that just are wanting jobs, and they're just throwing everything at something that really don't know what they're doing. So it is a very good way to go if and I'll be glad to entertain that if it's a suggestion of the commission. So.
Well, I think it certainly can avoid surprises like the one you just mentioned.
I think it's a
Or
wonderful
worse.
suggestion. I think it's a good one. If you want it as a motion, I'll be glad to make the motion. I'll move that we recommend that they pre-qualify the contractors.
Okay.
Second.
Okay. Any further discussion?
I see I'm going to vote for that.
Yeah.
All in favor?
Aye.
Motion passes. All right. I had one question. You mentioned they're upgrading the controls system. Will that also upgrade with this project the control system for our existing
Yes.
flat?
Yeah, that's what I'm talking about. Yeah,
Okay.
that's why I was saying we would put the new online, then take the old off and upgrade that so that they're all the same control system at that point.
Okay. What's the timeline for these? We've got 2 different projects, and we're taking the old offline twice.
Yeah, these membranes will probably do at the end of the year. By the time they get the membranes and everything, it'll be sometime towards the end of the year that we'll we'll work around getting
For this 2 additional flats.
for the first replacement of the old membranes inside
Okay.
it. Then the plant will be back online again, and then you're talking about starting the construction of the whole new stuff that will take a year and a half to 2 years from now.
Okay.
So by the time that, so say this is coming offline for a 2-week period at the end of this year. The following year, it'll come offline but you really won't come offline because you'll have the 2 other skids running at that time. So it's really not an interruption of service like just the replacement of these
Okay,
elements are.
great.
So, and let me mention, there's one more thing that I'll be bringing back to the commission here. As part of this, once we start the design phase, they're going to be designing the Afton pumps, or the high pressure pumps that we use, and they're a product pump, or really they're built for the gas industry. So there's a 48-week lead time on when you put a purchase order in for the pump to where it'll get delivery. So we will be doing that quickly and getting the pump selected and get it in the queue and order it, so that, because I hate for a contractor to come in, start his job, and then have to wait a year for the pumps to get delivered. So as we start the design process, we're going to purchase them directly, leave them out of the contract so that we can have them here for when we start construction.
Okay, great.
I take it there are no alternatives to those pumps.
You know what? The pumps that we have right now have been running for 20 years, and we have 0 maintenance that we've done on them. So it's one of those things that when you find a good product, you really don't want to mess with an alternative to it. So.
Okay, so we need a motion then to,
I think you still have.
Sorry, I
a question.
have still one more question.
Okay.
On the question of the current units replacing the membranes, is there a period throughout the year where the water demand is the least, where you could do that with minimum impact? Or
Yeah, we would want to definitely do it before March, because March it's the highest, and then this time of summertime when the rainy season is, it's a good time to replace it, but we'll see if we can't do it in the winter time when there's not a lot of demand also. Once the irrigation cycle kicks off, where people go back to watering once a day, we see a drop off, and so I think we'll be fine if we do it, and we'll make sure the tanks are full, everything else, as we start the process.
Okay.
okay, anything else? Any public comment? Okay. So, make a motion that we recommend to City Council that we proceed with this RFP.
So moved.
Work order. Yeah.
Is it a work order? Okay,
Yeah, it's a work order,
Work order.
task order.
okay.
So move.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Anything else today?
Well, I got something else for Rob before you run back. It was in the paper about moving the sewage treatment plant. And as I remember when we talked about this in 2004, the tanks were going to stay there. Would the tanks move?
If you were to construct something new at the water plant, you have a 3 million gallon tank there that's sitting right there. You could convert that to a storage tank and possibly add another one if you needed another one. If you're going to move off-site, it would be more difficult to leave those tanks and those pressure pumps and then pump water all the way over to those tanks and then repump it out of those tanks to the system. So from an operation standpoint and a operating cost, I would look at abandoning everything off that site, except for if you needed some type of an inline booster pump. Hopefully you wouldn't. From all the calculations that I've done, I don't see where you would need an inline booster at the wastewater plant, but if you did, that could remain right there, but it could be something that's very low to the ground, small little structure up against the bridge. And then you still have utility lines that are in there that would have to stay, like the water crossing that goes over to the barrier island comes through that property. Um,
And the stuff that runs up, or the pipe that you ran to the
comes
deep
out of there
wall,
and goes.
it comes out of there too.
Well,
so
and that's what we would do is we would convert that line that's actually now carrying excess reclaimed water to the water plant would be converted to a forest main to carry raw sewage to the water plant site. And if you look at it from a hydraulic grade line standpoint, we operate the lift station at the wastewater plant at a roughly elevation 13, and the ground elevation at the water plant is relatively elevation 16. So if the pipe is 3 feet below ground, it's in essence about the same elevation. It's just then friction losses in pipes and interconnections of pipes out in the force main network to redirect flow to make sure that we don't have a large friction loss that would cause a problem with lift stations pumping to the plant. But I've modeled it a couple different times, and each time it's little minor tweaks here and there, and it would make sense to, at that point, like I said, to also abandon those tanks, because otherwise you're roughly spending 10, 15 cents, because it would be, you would have to construct another line too if you didn't get rid of those tanks that were there. You would either be spending about
In other words,
25
if you-
cents per thousand to fill a tank, and then 25 cents per thousand to empty a tank, or, in the long run, do I spend another $750,000 or $1 million to build another new tank sitting right there, and at 25 cents per thousand, it doesn't take too many years to make up the difference. So it would be my suggestion to do away with the tanks and everything at that site. But that's still years down the road. Yeah. So I think those
No,
conversations.
I just remember from 2004 our discussions compared to what I've heard here.
I think some of the original estimates from 04, 07 period left them there.
Yeah.
It was after those discussions that I looked at it, and it was after those discussions that we constructed that force main across town to carry the reclaimed water. And when we designed that, specifically to try to eliminate having those tanks in there, or the need for those tanks in the future.
Thank you.
Okay, anyone else have anything? In that case, entertain a motion to adjourn.
So move.
Okay, the meeting is adjourned.